And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dr. Alex Ling, who researches megalithic sites and water sources worldwide. He is also the founder of the healing natural water company, Aquan. Dr. Ling, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me today.
So how did a general practitioner like you get involved in megalithic sites?
Well, I have to explain that when I studied medicine, I already studied art beforehand. So my first passion was actually to be an artist, and especially to work with stone. So I was trained as a sculptor, and I was working as a sculptor for many years, hand in hand or side by side, really, to be being a practitioner. So it was kind of started off as a hobby, but later on I got more successful actually by showing my artwork, and so the medical side was slipping away a little bit. So, and while I was traveling and getting inspiration, I visited many ancient sites because, of course, in Britain, for example, most of the megalithic structures, the stone circles like Stonehenge, and many other sites across Britain are all created out of granite. And granite, of course, is a stone. And so I was getting very keen to learn more about it. And one of the first questions I had is, why did they build these structures? What is the connection between the humans who build it and the environment they placed these megastructures, these megalithic structures? So I was looking for a deeper reason, meaning, if you like, and through a friend of mine who was an astrologer, he explained that there is also certain alignments and earth energies, and we're going back like a very long time. So I got really interested in the understanding and the connection between humans and earth energies. So then I was, being a scientist, I was always very curious in how can we literally prove maybe that there is more to our connection with nature than we can see. And I had this crazy idea to investigate the stone. And I was already in that time quite interested in water and water energies and memory of water, which is known, for example, through Dr. Emoto. And so from that point, I thought, well, there is water in stone. It contains rock crystal, and in rock crystal, especially within granite, in the cooling period, we find when the rock crystals are formed within the granite, that there are tiny air pockets, if you like, which are filled with water, not water as we could really see it. It's water vapor. So if you open up these kind of little air pockets within the crystal, then you could extract, theoretically, a memory from the water vapor. So I was kind of interested in the technical side of it and try to find a way how to record a sound which was coming from the megalithic sites, reflecting a memory going back thousands of years. And through working with different sound technicians and people who are also knowledgeable about frequencies, and a good friend of mine who's a scientist, we had the idea to just play a frequency into the stone, into the granite stone, and then record it on the other side and see what would happen. The only problem was that we needed to find the right frequency sound and the right frequency to communicate or to excite the stone, as I say in scientific terms, and then to record the sound which was given from the stone. So going through hundreds and hundreds of different frequencies, ranging from different kind of music frequencies to sounds which we had people kind of singing and doing all sorts of overtone singing because it reflects a certain frequency. I suddenly said, it's all far too complicated. Let's just go back to basics and let's just think logical. And so I came across the idea that we use the whale sound, because the whale sound in the ocean travels, of course, enormous distances. But that wasn't really the reason why. My reason was that there was an experiment which was conducted by NASA, and they used the satellite and they recorded the sound of the Earth from outer space. And it was quite surprising because it was the frequency of C4, which is a lower key C4, very often played by an ancient instrument like the flute, for example. And it just, as it happens, is the same frequency where whales are also communicating from. So I thought, let's just try this and see what happens. Also, the sound is the sound of the bees humming, the ocean waves crashing on the shore. So it's all the same frequency. So we used that frequency, we played it into the stone, and we recorded it on the other side. And something extraordinary happens. We were expecting the signal to travel through a roughly 1 meter wide stone in about 0.2 milliseconds to go from one side to another. That's the kind of same speed when I'm talking that you can hear my voice. And that didn't happen because the sound was delayed. And it was delayed quite substantially. So instead of 0.2 milliseconds, it took actually 1.2 seconds to travel through the stone, which is very different. And we repeated it, and we had another one which traveled 1.9 seconds. So to rule out that there was any interaction or any kind of sound pollution from the surrounding, we conducted it on different days, and we always had the same outcome. It was always delayed. And not only delayed, also the stone, for some very reason, created a different frequency. So the sound was actually longer than the original sound which we played into the stone. So that doesn't sound like extremely exciting, but it actually is a big deal. So we could prove in that way that there is some form of information inside the stone which has delayed the transmission, the travel speed from one end of the stone to another, while it was picking up some other information. Then I thought, okay, let's just go a bit further and use that frequency and play to music, to water, and see if we can extract the blueprint from it and see what happens then. So we then used the frequency and the sound, which we recorded from the stone, and we played it into some water, which was in a petri dish, and we could see the semantics on the surface. And then we fast froze the water sample, and then we took pictures of it with a special lens. And we were really surprised that we could see images emerging which seemed to have been telling a story. So it wasn't just like a pretty picture where the ice was forming crystals and there were some colorations. It actually literally was like a photograph. And this we developed further into going to different water sources starting from little springs and rivers in the UK to an event which was just recently in April, which was the solar eclipse. And that particular solar eclipse happened, of course, in Mexico with a duration of 4.28.1 seconds in the zone of silence, which is near Mapimi. And it's an old ancient seabed, ocean bed, which is just now consisting of beautiful dunes. And so we went there with a team and we recorded in that moment a water sample, which we have taken with us, so that whatever happened in the eclipse would reflect into the water. And then we took a blueprint of it. And we were very surprised to see that it was just like a photograph, literally, from the moment where the eclipse was hitting the dunes. So that was the first time when we really noticed that we are onto something quite big.
Now, you mentioned Mexico's zone of silence. Is that something like Mexico's own version of the Bermuda Triangle or something?
Yes, I think starting from when it was actually putting it, when it came to the attention of the public was when in the 1960s the rocket crashed. There was a rocket which was kind of flow over the zone of silence, and because of the magnetic field, and I have to explain that the zone of silence is not just a ordinary area. It is an extremely interesting area because there's a huge magnetic field. And when you take your compass, for example, into the zone of silence, into the desert, it keeps spinning. So, and in the center of it all is a mountain which is called San Ignacio. San Ignacio is a 1,440 meter high mountain, most likely to be an extinct volcano because of all the volcanic material which we have found, all the rocks. And so that sits literally at the center. Surrounding the whole area is a huge area where you find all sorts of rock carvings from what are known to be the Erythilas, which are not existing anymore, but the descendants are the Laguneros. So, but the Erythilas used to be a civilization in Mexico which are extremely close to being what I would describe merman and mermaid. There's a whole story about these people living in water in the lagoons. And so they had a certain way of communicating with water. So I was extremely interested in the background of these indigenous people. So that was partially why we went to the zone of silence again. But in the first place, we went there for the eclipse. And the zone of silence also is a UFO hotspot. There is most likely, I would say, from my experience, whenever we stayed there, we witnessed something in the skies. Most of the people who live inside the zone of silence, which are Mexicans and descendants of the Erythilas and Laguneros, they all live with it in a way which is quite a bit unusual. So for them, they have made actually the statement just recently on TV. There is a place called Linda Vista, which is very close to the dunes, which are just described, where we went for the eclipse. And they officially, openly just say, well, they just live amongst us. They are extraterrestrials which live in the zone of silence. There are numerous witness accounts, which we also have witnessed because we have talked to a lot of people within the zone of silence who have a ranch there or live there for a long time. And most of the people have told us that they have seen either something unusual in the sky, or they have witnessed some beings which are humanoids walking through the desert and apparently helping people who get stuck in the desert. So there are all sorts of different stories out there. I must say, as a scientist, of course, I wanted to know more about it, and I wanted to see how much is true of that story. So I stumbled over San Ignacio, and I found out actually that the mountain is owned by a private person in America. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows why he purchased that mountain. There's an official story that he's protecting the tortoises, which are not extremely close to the mountain, let's say. It took me quite a while. I'm very friendly with a village in the zone of silence, which is Ejido La Flor. And it consists of about 15 people living still in this village. And it's a bit like the time has just stopped completely. It's like something you would expect to see hundreds of years ago. So there's no Wi-Fi, there's very limited technology. The people are living off the land. Their medicine is coming from the land as well. So their knowledge is really incredible when it comes to these to this kind of things. And so I had a good chat with them, and I said, okay, now please tell me the truth. What's going on here? Because there's all sorts of stories going on from extraterrestrials. And I said, well, remember the rocket which crashed in 1960? And I said, yes, I heard about it, I read about it. And I said, it wasn't a rocket. So it was a ship, a spaceship. And I looked into it, and it was quite interesting that the government has really sealed off a huge area when the rocket came down into that particular part of the zone of silence. They sealed the whole thing off with military. They even put a railway line in their tracks in there. They had a runway. Nobody was allowed to take any pictures. I mean, it was completely top secret. And they removed literally every single bit. I mean, when you go there, there's nothing to see, except there's a very flat surface, which suggests maybe that there was some form of pressure from a rocket or something which compacted the ground, so it's much harder in that area. But there's nothing. I looked everywhere, and there's not a single bit of metal to find. So they shifted it out of the zone. It took 9 months to do that. And in that time, everybody was sworn to silence. So the people who knew what was going on wouldn't talk to us about it. And some very few people would make very careful suggestions. So there's definitely something which is not quite right.
It does sound suspicious there. Are there any other places on the planet that's similar to that?
Well, magnetic fields are they're not uncommon. They exist in different countries. And also they shift, of course. They're not always in one particular area. They shift over thousands of years through polar shift and other natural events. And so there was one, for example, which was in the peninsula of Levant, which is just in front of Israel, a huge landmass. And that has pretty much had the same kind of story. There was a mountain, it was volcanic, and this magnetic field has existed there for many thousands of years. So, and we have, of course, some areas in Britain even which are verging on this, but some parts of that are in the ocean. So it's more difficult to find evidence of that. But these kind of magnetic fields are not uncommon. And in the zone of silence, you have the meteorites which are attracted to that area. And so you have one particular area in the desert, and literally you can pick up a small meteorite every meter or so. It's completely full of
That's amazing.
tiny meteorites. Yeah.
In what part
So
of Mexico is this place?
it's towards Mapimi, stretching actually for quite a distance. So the zone of silence is about 50 kilometers or so in diameter, but the whole zone goes from one end, which is Mapimi, which is the northern part, of course, to an area which I think is Chihuahua, if I remember right. My geology sometimes is lapsing a little bit. So towards Chihuahua. And then you have, of course, also the lagoons, which are in the same area. And that's kind of the border, really, of the zone of silence, even so it's not quite inside, which is Cuatro Ciénegas. There are 4 beautiful lagoons, and they're still the only lagoons, I think, which water sources which are left in the area from this ancient ocean.
Can people just drive there? Like just go there and look around for themselves?
Yes, most of the time you can do that. Most of the Mexicans who live in the area are quite open really to take you on a tour, especially when you happen to go to Linda Vista. Eva and Eugenio, they own this cafe, and the cafe is painted from the outside, and you can't miss it with this enormous paintings of the extraterrestrials, the greys with the big eyes. So, and there is a sign as well which says that the area of the extraterrestrials is starting there, and so there is a lot of indication. You can't miss it. So they're quite happy to take you into the dunes, where you can have your own UFO experience. Whatever the lights are in the end, there is a lot of lights and strange objects flying around in the night, and I've seen it myself, and I cannot classify them as anything else than UFOs.
What did it look like?
They were like orbs flying through the air, and so they're quite a distance away, and they have no regular flight pattern as such, and there are no signal lights or anything. But they are really round objects, and sometimes people see triangular ones, and some people see cylinder-shaped ones, all sorts of different UFOs or spaceships, whatever you want to call them, who have been seen in the area. So the closest we got was just on our last visit, which is about 3 weeks ago or so, and we stayed in the dunes overnight, so we had our tents and everything there. And so we slept in the dunes, which is beautiful because the sky is just incredible. There's no light pollution. And in the middle of the night, we saw these lights in the sky, and they were kind of flying very fast, making this figure-8 figures and circles and all sorts of things. And then suddenly disappearing into nowhere. But then we just spotted that there were 2 lights which were coming towards us. And I thought first, there's someone coming with 2 big torches, or 2 people who holding a torch coming towards us and maybe checking us out. And but then I noticed that the lights are not close enough on the ground unless these people would have been like 10, 20 meters tall. So we decided to split the team, and some people then walked towards the lights, and I stayed behind to look at the other sky lights in the sky. And so the 2 people from my team, they got quite close, and they took a footage as well of these lights. And when we looked at it on the video later, you could really see how the lights were actually not a disc. It was something 3-dimensional, and it was spinning
Like
inside.
Would you say it's like plasma?
Yeah, a bit like plasma, exactly. And it was rotating within. So that was something I had never seen that before. And it was really not consistent just in one position. It changed position all the time, and it came literally towards us. And then as soon as my friends were walking towards these orbs, they would gain in height and then would disappear. So that was the closest we got to it. Just on that evening before we entered actually the desert, and it's very difficult. You need to have a special truck. So we had a pickup truck, and I know the tracks really well, but you can't just go in there. You would get completely lost. And the tracks are quite difficult to drive as well. So if it rained, for example, you get stuck really quickly. So there are 3 different ways how to go to these to the dunes. But you can ask Eva and Eugenio, who own the cafe, and they are quite happy to take people to the center and provide for them to stay the night, for example.
Did you test the water at those lagoons there?
Yes, absolutely, we did. Yeah.
Was there anything interesting in your findings?
Yes, we took some water with us as well. And what we did is we went into the dunes, and we took a few grains of sand and we connected it to the water which we collected from the lagoons. And something quite extraordinary was happening in the picture, because when we extracted the blueprint, we got an image of the dunes. It was sand colored, and in the center of the dunes was a pyramid, clear as day, a very clear image. So I took the image and I asked, because we did it anyway in the cafe, so they are so helpful. And whenever I go there, I've been there now 4 or 5 times, and they didn't have a fridge which had a freezer, so they asked the neighbor, and they came back with a whole freezer, chest freezer, and they put it in the middle of the cafe, and they plugged it in. So I had somewhere to freeze my samples. And so I showed them the image, and they weren't really surprised. And they just looked at me and they said, you know, for quite a long time, people have suspected that there is a city underneath the sand because of all the rock carvings which are left by the indigenous people, suggesting that there was a city. And part of it was a pyramid. So that was quite incredible.
You're saying that there is a pyramid in the zone of silence?
If I believe the blueprint of the water, then yes.
Okay, it's based on the blueprints of the water.
It's all, yes, but as also the indigenous people are telling us that there is a city and there is a known pyramid underneath the sand, so that kind of coincided with the blueprints which we have taken.
Let me ask you this. How do you derive blueprints from water? Okay,
what we do is we have a petri dish, and we fill the petri dish just very, very, about 1 ml of water within that petri dish, which translates roughly as 3 ml. So when we take the water and we put it in the petri dish, then we put it into the freezer, or at home where I have my laboratory, I have a cold plate. So the cold plate, you can put literally the petri dish, which is glass, on top of the cold plate, and then you can see it freezing. And I also have a technique where I use the camera and I use the time lapse to see when the water is freezing, and it's always the same pattern how it's freezing. And while it's freezing, we have this special lenses who's taking the photographs or the video, showing all these beautiful rainbow colors forming from the outside to the inside. And this pattern then is forming a picture. So the picture then is a visual memory of whatever is going on either in the water source or when we introduce it to other materials. For example, when we were studying the rock carvings, we would take small fragments of the rock and just put it inside the water sample to then get a memory of that particular carving. And so we have done probably altogether on this trip alone, which was 3 months, about 2,000 different images of all the different water sources which we have collected. So it's a very lengthy kind of task to do that, but there is actually a global network emerging which is connecting all different water sources to each other, like a water matrix, if you like. And so we're just starting to invite people to send in they can purchase a kit. We send out the kit, and then they send the water sample back to us. And then we're extracting the blueprint. And with that reference, we can see if there's any other waters which share a similar blueprint, because that is exactly what happens. So we have some different water sources here in Mexico who seem to share a similar blueprint.
Do you feel that these blueprints are accurate?
Well, what we do is, and I'm very skeptical myself of all my work. I'm the biggest skeptic of my work. And but I have taken at least 10 different samples, 10 different petri dishes from the same sample. Then I return to the same water source, take more samples. I even have other people taking the sample just to avoid that I may be influencing the water. So, and in all of this, I can say for sure that the images taken from each water source is very accurate in my opinion, because it's a repetitive pattern.
I want to ask one other thing about water, and that is, where is the memory stored in water? Because we know there's basically hydrogen and oxygen and maybe trace minerals that are in the water, but
Yes,
I'm assuming it's going to be in some sort of energy source, right?
it is. And I think that the trace minerals are a really big indicator for that, because there are salts inside the water. And this salt is like crystallization, of course, and it can keep, and it also is like a amplifier for the frequencies, if you like. Salt is conductor. So in that sense, the information is stored in the water, but it is a makeup of the water in connection with the minerals. We don't actually know much about water. That is the other point, which is so interesting. We know that, for example, our ancestors and the indigenous people mainly refer to water as the cosmic ocean. And in some of my studies, I came across these incredible celestial bodies which are in our universe, coexisting next to the black hole, which are called quasars. And these quasars are huge water bodies, and they hold, for example, one quasar can hold as much as 140 trillion times the amount of water combined from all the oceans on our planet. And many scientists kind of start to believe that all galaxies have the original water from these quasars.
Interesting. I never heard about quasars
Yes, of course. Yes,
being involved with water.
yes, they are enormous sources of water right in our universe, in form of water vapor, of course.
Water vapor. Okay, makes sense.
Yes, like the plasma. Plasma is also something, and that's why I'm studying the cenotes, and I'm studying, of course, the lagoons. Because of the minerals, the water texture is completely different. The makeup is different. So it's a lot thicker than our water or water from a spring or a river. And I studied it because of my company, because we were literally creating water plasma. So, and usually water plasma doesn't exist in outside a tube. So you need to protect it from oxygen, because then it will just collapse. But there are ways how to stabilize it. And that's why still the cenotes or the lagoons are very close to water plasma, I would say, in its natural form.
You are a scientist and you are someone who works with stone. When you've witnessed some of these megalithic structures on the planet, and I don't know if you've been to Peru or Lebanon or any of these places, but what do you think about when you see these rocks cut perfectly?
As a sculptor, I know how time-consuming it is just to cut a stone into half. So, and even with all the technology we have, I've seen structures which, in my opinion, is impossible to be built by humans. So there is definitely some form of technology involved. Either we had the technology as humans and we lost the knowledge of it, or there is, as so many believe, an influence from a different planet, a different civilization.
So you're saying they didn't cut them with bronze tools?
I doubt it. Yes, I don't think that was the case. No. I've seen a lot of structures around the world which definitely indicate that there is something else involved. And I have met, for example, people like Eric van Däniken, which is a very well-known archaeologist in Germany, and he has been targeted ever since because of his ideas that extraterrestrials would have built these kind of mega structures or megalithic sites. And I was always very open-minded to these kind of ideas, because it would be quite arrogant to think that we are the only civilization in the whole of the universe, or all the universes, shall I say. And and I've seen evidence myself when I traveled to Turkey. There is a lot of hidden knowledge, and the hidden knowledge is in form of some archaeological digs, for example, which are very often sponsored by Siemens AG, especially in Turkey. It's an electronics company. And my father, I'm not going into it all now, but my father was quite involved, let's say, in some form or shape with some of the old lodges in Germany, which originated from the Freemasons. And so their kind of knowledge was quite substantial when it came to archaeology. And as I said, without going into details, I know for sure that there's a lot of antiquities and findings which are found by the archaeologists, which is not being shown to the public. And because it doesn't fit into the timeline or the timeline of the history, and it tells actually literally a different story, they have decided that it will be locked away and never be shown. So, and that was very frustrating for many of the young archaeologists I met in Turkey. And many of them were involved in the excavation of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe and the other tepes which are in the area. And I got quite friendly with a few of them, and they told me in confidence that there is a lot of the archaeological digs are very controlled. And soon as there is something being dug up which is slightly controversial and could point to a different story or history, is just being shifted out of this country.
Do you think archaeologists are doing that, or they're taking orders from somebody else?
They're definitely ruled by the archaeological societies. They have their guidelines. It's a bit like a doctor who has to follow their guidelines. And so they're being told what is, I mean, all of the finds are usually recorded, but some of them aren't. And that I know for sure. I have talked to Turkish people as much as the German team who was sponsored by AG, Siemens AG. And I spoke also to Klaus Schmidt, who was a leading archaeologist in Göbekli Tepe until his death in 2014. And he himself had a huge battle on his hand because Göbekli Tepe, when they excavated this whole area, the main part, they found actually entrances to some cave system, tunnel systems, if you like. And he always wanted to preserve that area to do further investigation. But he has been told not to do so. In fact, at some point, he came to the site and found that most of the tunnel systems have been filled up with concrete. So, and that is a common story in archaeology. There are so many areas I heard just lately because of the river levels of the water levels of the Tigris, which are quite low, that some of the old tunnel systems are being exposed. And instead of investigating it, they just lock them up and nobody can investigate it.
It reminds me of the original movie, The Planet of the Apes. Toward the end, they found the cave with the things of man, and they blew up the cave, to preserve their narrative.
Yeah, it is really like that. And it makes you wonder, I mean, I'm not a conspiracist, but I do know from my father that there's a lot of truth in what's going on here, and many people are probably not aware of it. But there is definitely a society in this society. it's like a secret circle.
Out of all the places that you have visited on the planet, is there one that sticks out for you that is mind-boggling and you just can't understand how somebody built it?
There are quite a number of places, yes. For a long time, I was very fascinated by the Easter Islands, and I couldn't understand how you possibly could build these kind of incredible statues. It would take a lifetime for a whole army to build these kind of structures. But the pyramids are surely one of the structures which I think are very, very misunderstood. And of late, I've been looking much more deeply into water plasma. And there is, for example, the pyramid in Teotihuacan, so which is, they just found a tunnel system in 2006, I believe it was. And they found that there was water underneath the pyramid, which is quite a common thing. And the reason for that is that it's has to do with the energetic pattern of the pyramid, and is a conductor, of course. But then, just a few years ago, they discovered that some of the pyramids would have also mercury underneath in these tunnel systems, and it would be connected to the water. So I kind of researched it, and I found out that mercury also can store information, and it's a liquid. And if the same information is stored in water as it is in mercury, for example, because they're using blueprints in terms of sigils, for example. Sigils are very well known in magic, for example. There are 150 of those connected to King Solomon. And these rituals have been used also many thousands of years ago to manipulate our water sources. Now that sounds very strange, and I have to just very briefly go into that, because the one area which I'm really puzzled with is Megiddo. Megiddo is a mount which is just about an hour and a half away from Tel Aviv, and that's Israel. So, and Mount Megiddo the translation is actually Armageddon. This word Armageddon has no other translation in no other language. It is what it is. It's called Armageddon. And so Mount Megiddo is consisting of about 26, 27 different records of different civilizations. And they built it up, they destroyed it, built it up, destroyed it. And I was studying the Canaanites, which is a civilization in that particular area, which is the peninsula of the Levant, in that area just in front of Israel. Now, there's a whole story connected to that. It would take too long to go into it, but let me tell you that the original people who lived in that specific desert land were highly evolved, and they had a great connection to astrology, astronomy, and also to water. So inside Mount Megiddo, there is a spring. So you can go down, about 40 meters or so into the mountain, and you come to a tunnel system, and it leads you to the spring, or should I say, it should lead you to the spring. But someone in history decided that they are going to imprint the water with sacrificial energies, because that's what happened there a lot, and imprint the water with their warmongering energy and preserve it by sealing off the spring, and so nobody could change that blueprint. Now, water, I have to explain, is like a child. It takes on whatever you put into it. It doesn't know the difference between good and bad. It's just energy. And so it takes on that frequency blueprint of whatever energy is causing it. So in that place, in Megiddo, they would use this kind of energy to be sure that their control over the people would last as long as possible. It just happens that this particular area is one, if not the biggest crisis area in terms of wars ever been recorded. There never was any peace. And partially that's because there's a highway going from Israel and the Arabic countries through Turkey and finally to Europe. So it was strategically a very important point. So that's why it has been always being thought about this particular place. So when the Canaanites left and King Solomon was moving into Megiddo, he was the one who then decided to create cisterns. So for the very first time, we could find records where people would talk about cisterns. And these cisterns, so it wasn't actually the Romans who invented them. So it was much, much older. And so King Solomon then put out a law towards his people, forbidding them to drink from living water sources, which are springs and free-flowing water sources, which are structured. And structured water is very important to us humans, because it can literally mean the difference between good health and bad health if you have no access to it. But also it has an input on our pineal gland. So if you have structured water, then the pineal gland is not being calcified, for example, and you are completely connected to what the ancient people described the cosmic water. We all have had these gifts and much more senses. And I know that in medicine, because there's still some senses like a leftover, now seen as more a dysfunction than a function. For example, people could see colors when they were eating food. So that was a normal sense for us humans to have, and completely disappeared. Only a few people still have that. So, but so King Solomon then forbid, literally, and a Sumerian king, pretty much at the same time, forbid the population to drink from the living water and ordered them to drink only from the cistern. And the cistern is a dark place. It's not living water because there's no flow. It's a rectangular box, and the water literally loses the structure. So that was very interesting for me to find that out.
Dr. Ling, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What's the best way to contact you?
Okay, I have an email, which is an email called info@aquan.co.uk.
Do you have anything that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Yes, what we're working on at the moment is definitely the water network. So we're looking for what we call water guardians, so that people can go to their own water source. If it is a spring or well or the ocean or lake, it doesn't really matter. They can have there's a possibility. So that's what we're going to just put on our website within the next 2 weeks. So please be patient. It will happen. But we needed to find ambassador in each country who then will process these kind of blueprints. So we want a global network where people then pull together through this network, communicating to each other, but also cross-referencing their water sources, their water blueprints. And people use it also for their own healing. They use it for meditation. They use these water blueprints also to enhance their water, their drinking water, to connect it back into the original blueprint. So there are all sorts of different things which you can do with that. For me, the most important thing is that we have a global army of people who then can protect the water, because there is so much corruption going on, especially here in Mexico and other countries as well. Sadly, that some of the primal waters, which are still available in form of the cenotes or the lagoons, they are under threat because of corrupt farming industries or farmers who are sponsored by the government, and they are using the water to feed their cattle. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you would have an everlasting supply of water, but in an area where it doesn't rain for 18 months, for example, which is the case near Mapimi, you are running into a problem. So not only that the indigenous people don't have any water, but also the tortoises, which are an endangered species, for example, also running into problems. And of course, not to forget that it's a really stupid concept to use 9 liters of water, pristine water, to produce 1 liter of milk. And these kind of things are happening all over in Mexico. So what we're trying to do is also to raise funds for these people to fight back. But mainly for me also very important is that this network then can monitor the waters and say, hey, there's a pollution, there's something going on here, there's raw sewage being pumped into my stream, and it makes people sick, and it's leaking into the groundwater, and there's dead fish on the surface. Whatever the problem is, we have a huge amount of people who are globally, internationally can make pressure and pressurizing these companies who are polluting our waters. And I think that is long, long overdue.
Dr. Ling, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Yes. I am actually very optimistic. And I do believe, and what I have seen from the water blueprints as well, water is actually reaching out to us. And as water has been also separated in many ways through interference, when we build dams and redirecting the rivers, water is reaching out to us and is having actually a message. And that message is coming through all the time, that we need to unite. We need to put our differences aside. And through the last recent years, I think we have been divided quite a lot. And it's time now to realize that we need to unite again. And we need to remember that we are living on this planet, and the first priority should be to preserve our planet for the future. So, and I can see that there's a lot of movement towards this, where people are really positive. They don't want this fear mongering anymore, which has been broadcasted over so many years now. They want to have solutions. And I think that's exactly where we're coming from. I have a lot of people who are in favor of restoring the water connection between us and the water. So I do believe that we have a very beautiful future, but we need to learn how to live with each other. And even the people who are, let's say, on the forefront and they have certain knowledge, there are certain people who are known to lead some movements. These kind of people are also very disconnected from each other. So we tried over the last half a year, and we were quite successful, to bring people together and to put the ego aside. Just forget about your ego. Just see it as an initiative, a global initiative to go into the future. And so we got people talking to each other, which usually haven't been talking for a long time. So I think there's still space for improvement. So please, everybody, whenever you had any kind of differences, just push it aside and just think that we all have to be together in this. That's how we can make change.
Dr. Ling, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.